Deepwoken, a lore and PvE focused game upon its release, but now every update appeals to the PvP side of the community, with even their next major update supposedly being Conquest, which is just a new mode geared towards PvP players only. In today's video, I'll be going over how the priorities of the Deepwoken developers have changed over time from a PvP and lore focused game into one that seemingly only cares about its PvP player base. Make sure to subscribe since only about 20% of the people watching this video right now are actually subscribed, and I'll actually be canceling today's stream since I need to go to the dentist. Let's get straight into it. On release and in Deepwoken's pre-release, the game was said to be a lore and PvE focused game where the world would change around you as you kept playing and over time, which was the entire point of the year counter at the top left, which was supposed to be a relative passage of time for potential technological and map advances within the world of Deepwoken, showing that the world could change even when you weren't playing the game. This addition to the game was the first one that they didn't really expand upon because the map doesn't change. Now this is a bit out of place, but every time I make a video with any sort of analyzing or criticism for Deepwoken, I get a bunch of comments saying, if you hate Deepwoken, stop playing it and stop making videos on it. I have never once said that I hate this game. Some of you have very bad comprehension skills. Regardless, this lack of map updating really wasn't too surprising since updating a map every so often is a lot of work, especially when it's meant to represent technological advances, meaning they'd likely have to be very different from previous renditions or at least different enough to, be noticeable, which is just a little bit too ambitious, which is something that the Deepwoken developers at Monad Studios seem to do quite a lot. But at this time, the game was still supposed to be primarily lore and PvE based, which means lore additions to the game and PvE or progression additions are the most important. However, back in early Deepwoken, one of the first major updates we got added two things. First of all, the Trial of One update. Quite a good addition for aiding in progression if you were skilled at the game, and it was well executed and honestly a great addition to the game, probably one of my favorite updates ever. But in the same update came the Chime of Conflict, my least favorite update in the entire game. This was the first PvP focused update in a long line of future updates. Upon release, the Chime had a few things different in comparison to now. First of all, Chime was the fastest way to progress when it came out. Winning a Chime match would give you like 5 investment points, which was just insanely fast progression. Even at the higher levels, a few Chime matches would get you from like power 58, 59 up to 60. Back when, power 60 was the top instead of power 20. This update already incentivized players to PvP because it was now the fastest way to progress, which meant PvE players who enjoyed the game that were like way more experienced in PvE than in PvE were now at a blatant disadvantage in terms of progression speed, just because they don't like the PvP as much as they like PvE. This was soon after nerfed, but the damage of adding Chime of Conflict was still there because of the PvP-based luck system. At the time, luck was the most efficient way to progress because it would guarantee that you would get rare and legendary talents back when the game had a lot more RNG to it. But there were only two ways to get it, which were defeating bosses or hordes of high-level enemies, or killing players. Two challenges which were not at all within the same scale of difficulty, and gave you luck at completely different rates. Because the easiest, most consistent way to get luck was to kill players, and you'd actually get more luck for killing players than for killing bosses, and it was way faster. So obviously people kind of had to do that to optimize their builds, which was lame because not everyone wants to play that way. Now, Chime of Conflict, which by the way was outright a contradiction to the developers' previous statements that they made in the past. I forget exactly who, but either Archmage or Reaconteur stated that there's two things that they would never add that were in Rogue Lineage that they wouldn't put in any of their future games. The first being Snap Gelidus, which by the way made it into the game via Ice Skate, the mantra, which is actually better than Snap Gelidus, which is so stupid. And the second being private servers, which essentially made their way into Deepwoken through the Chime of Conflict. Because yeah, Chime had skulls, but all you had to do was escape from the depths and then you could get straight back into it. It was really just a tiny deterrent, and even then, most people weren't losing 3 in a row because you just get worse opponents until you'd win. And after Chime was added, we started seeing a whole lot of balancing updates really focused on PvP. In fact, because of this, the only PvE balancing update added was damage and armor against monsters being a new armor stat, which came out over a year after Deepwoken had come out, as well as taking over 6 months for them to balance despite it being extremely powerful in the PvE meta, making the game quite boring and redundant, which really does show their levels of care for each side, because the PvE community gets a new stat and then it goes completely untouched, even though it was problematic and really made the game super grindy back when people needed legendary pip PvE kits. But then, a mantra does a little bit too much damage and they slap it with a 3% nerf the day after. It's so stupid. But Chime of Conflict wasn't the only major PvP update the game has had. The next major update after Chime, however, was Verse 2, which is a major PvE update, of course, but think about how many of those we've had in comparison to how many new legendary weapons that we've had. Anyway, a bit before Verse 2 came out, Voidwalker and Deepbound would be two newly released origins, but we're really just talking about Voidwalker for now. And holy fuck, this was a terrible addition. This gave a new way for PvP-only players to progress by killing other players. Except for some reason, Voidwalker gave you the ability to hunt people who aren't Voidwalkers for this EXP, usually just forcing PvE-based players to fight in PvP scenarios they don't want to be in that don't really benefit them. In my opinion, what Voidwalker should have been was an origin that put two Voidwalkers against each other, since clearly, if you're making like a Voidwalker build, you want to play PvP, right? Yeah. So why wouldn't you just put the people who want to play PvP against the people who want to play PvP, and then just change the lore a bit? Instead of having Voidwalkers be people who hunt regular people, have Voidwalkers be like Highlander. If you've seen the movie Highlander, there can be only one. Basically, it's a bunch of like aliens with superpowers, and they get stronger by killing each other, and once there's only one left, that's when they're like the strongest, right? Why didn't you just make the lore like that, and make it so Voidwalkers fought each other to progress? Because Voidwalkers want a PvP. People who aren't Voidwalkers don't want a PvP, so for now, you guys are making people go Voidwalker to avoid Voidwalkers in PvP, which is stupid, right? But no, the devs thought it'd be better to make PvP progressing players fight people who have no desire for progressing in PvP, when they could literally just have done the opposite and everyone would be happy. Now, in the same time frame, Deepbound also came out, and I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, if you don't want to fight Voidwalkers, just go Deepbound. But Deepbound back then was an absolutely terrible way to progress, for a few reasons. First of all, no Diluvian mechanism, which is currently the best way to progress in PvE for Deepbound, because, you know, it's just an arena with monsters in it that you can kill. Secondly, no mission board, so you can't exactly choose what monsters to fight, you just have to hope you could isolate the ones you're capable of beating as a freshie. And on top of this, all of the progression was just so slow in the beginning. Even if you had Maverick, starting Deepbound when it was added as an origin was such a slow start, and since this was before most PvE grind was done in the devs, it wasn't even worth it to spend most of your time in the devs until Verse 2 came out, at which point it was only worth it for the endgame loot grinding because of Layer 2, but it was still extremely slow in the beginning when all you can kill are Sharkos and Lionfish scattered around the map. As for PvE updates, we ended up getting Hell Mode, so just enemy spam and a lighting change. And then over a year and a half later, we would end up getting the Diluvian mechanism, which is just a room that spams pre-existing enemies at you. And fun fact, the entirety of the Diluvian mechanism was made the same day that it came out. The update was made the day of, right? Insane. Meanwhile, at this point in time, the game was in a weird spot where every week they'd drop a new elemental legendary weapon with 6 crit variants. This is when the Isly's Pyrokeeper came out, and they all did this as like a way to spice up and introduce new weapons into the PvP meta. Meanwhile, the PvE scene has had 2 updates, excluding Verse 2, and they're both just enemy spam. The next good PvE update would actually end up being the Maestro Evangard boss fight. This was significant for 2 reasons. First of all, it was a secret release. They didn't say anything about it in the patch notes, they just released it, and I think that was actually really cool. I wish they'd do this more and let the community discover things. So I don't know, they just put in the patch logs for the content section if they actually added something, not like, new menu button, and they put that in content to pad it, right? But they'd add like a new boss or a new quest or something, and they just say, new boss, new quest, and that's it, just let people find it. But also, the Maestro Evangard is the best boss fight in the entire game, indisputably, and it still is. Maestro is actually really fun to fight. Regardless, soon enough, Chime Skulls would be removed, and I said one time I wanted them to come back and people got mad at me, but I just really don't want people in Chime. Like, I hope the devs make it so dying in the reflections of self-map in Chime instantly wipes you just so people stop playing the mode. Because when I play Deepwoken, which is kind of rare at this point, I started playing it again a while ago and then I got bored of it again, but the skill disparity between Chime and non-Chime players is honestly insane. I haven't been particularly good at PvP since like Verse 1, but it feels like everyone in the overworld, even at max power levels on seemingly PvP-based builds, are just worse than the people in Chime of Conflict regardless of elo. So I'm either forced to fight players who aren't very good in the overworld, which is boring. I guess I could go into war servers, but then I just get jumped because I don't usually play with people. Or I can play Chime, which is boring and sucks, and it also eliminates and adds new factors to fighting that the overworld doesn't have, which is lame, right? Which, like, a 1v1 in the overworld isn't at all the same as a 1v1 in Chime of Conflict, even though this you know, video is supposed to be about how PvP now has like priority and predates PvE. Chime of Conflict has more balancing like priority than overworld combat, which is why bells are rarely touched. Like, not that any of them are particularly unbalanced. I think most of the bells are in a good spot, but some of them are just really weak and inviable in combat and their usages, but the devs ignore them because you can't use bells in the most common PvP method in Deepwoken. Do I think crazy slots should get a rework? Yeah, maybe. Do I think smoke screen should get a rework? Yeah, probably. But are the devs gonna touch them? No. Why? Because nobody uses them. And if nobody uses them, then that clearly means that they're not a problem, right? No, it's stupid. The devs really don't have a good, like, philosophy on balancing. They really just like to nerf a lot of things, and I rarely see them buffing the things that are bad. Now, do things need nerfs? Yes, every update they add a new legendary, and usually it needs a nerf. You remember when the Wretched Mob Blades came out? But a lot of the time, they just let that power creep get to them, and then it ends up like with a bunch of meta weapons every week, and then everything that isn't the meta is just unusable, and it's so lame. And it's not even that hard to patch out. All they'd have to do is try and match damage to swing speed per, like, weapon, and then try and equalize the DPS between most weapons of each type, instead of, you know, having Wretched Mob Blades being a heavy weapon with 600 DPS, and then having, like, Skull Piercer be a light weapon with 6 DPS. You get the point I'm making? Weapons should be generally balanced to each other. And it only really gets worse when you look at what major updates we were supposed to get are, right? We got War Mode servers. That's a PvP update. I'd say that's a major update. Conquest, that's a PvP update that's basically just a 6v6 in a special map. And any PvE content we're supposed to get is either not even started, like Layer 3 and Void Tower. Meanwhile, we have unfinished and lazy PvE content like Serenade Hollow, which is both unfinished and quite lazy, being just a couple of maps with pre-existing enemies in them, and being unfinished, seeing as how it's supposed to have a unique boss of some sort and like unique legendary loot and stuff like that, but it doesn't. Deepwoken was supposed to be a game focused on its unique PvE and lore experiences, and the only PvE update we've gotten in recent time was the World Events update, which I don't even count as an actual major update because it was only released as an excuse to delay their actual major update, which is Conquest, which is a PvP update. They were going to drop all that PvE content with Conquest, and Conquest, the PvP update, was going to be their main focusing point for that update. And I'm just tired of it. Like, I kind of just hope the devs return to their roots soon and start making new PvE and lore-based content again, because I'm tired of seeing the weekly patch notes 2 days late every week, and it's another weapon that benefits like 15 people total that'll just get nerfed in a week. I want the devs to take some time and focus on the PvE content, because that's what the game is supposed to be. If you disagree, I'd love to hear your takes on this in the comments below. Maybe try and change my opinions. Ideally, keep your comments concise, since I do read all of them on every video, and your essay may be a bit long. Anyway, I love you all. Shout out to YouTuber, Tier 2 and higher members, Green, Brick, Goobka, High Card, Bacon, and Drizzy Drake Fan. Have an amazing day, and goodbye.